I got to a place in yoga where I was able to laugh when I got triggered. And for me, that is a very liberating thing. It's hard for me to maybe get as excited as Brett describes because sometimes for me there's so little anxiety or a little I want to do that already-ness. But I've been able to come to a place where I'm able to kind of like laugh at it and laugh at myself and have joy because I've reminded myself that the whole point of why I'm doing this, right, is to cultivate more joy and peace in my life.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Welcome back to the show. Today, we are talking about how to coach yourself through mental obstacles that come up in yoga class. Yoga can be a spiritual pressure cooker, according to today's guest, Awilda Rivera. She's a yoga teacher, a coach, a spiritual advisor, and a former lawyer. And if you've ever cried, lost your temper, or experienced some intense emotions as you practice yoga, it's okay. We've all been there, and Awilda today is going to share with us her top 3 tips on how to coach yourself when you're in those rough moments. Before we dive in, I want to remind you of how you can support the show. Number 1, ratings and reviews here on iTunes. They make a huge difference. And if you leave a rating or review on iTunes, screenshot it with your phone and email it to my team, info@brettlarkin.com. We will actually send you a beautiful PDF booklet with all my favorite affirmations and journaling prompts. And that's totally free just as a thank you gift for leaving a review. So leave a review, take a screenshot, email that screenshot to info@brettlarkin.com, and I will get that to you. Second way to support the show is by making a purchase at SavannahSpirit.com. Today, I'm featuring their Tibetan copper healing bracelet. It's this beautiful copper, brass, and nickel bangle. It's actually handcrafted by Tibetan monks at a specific monastery in India. And these bangles are believed to have a healing property that can really help balance the energies of the bodies. It would literally go with anything. It's so beautiful. And remember, you can use that coupon code TAKE25 for $25 off anything in your shopping cart at SavannahSpirit.com. So make sure to go there and check it out. All right, diving into our conversation with Awilda. Let's do this.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk yoga with you.
Yay. Well, I know one of the things that we're going to dive deep into today is sort of what to do, mental obstacles, right, that come up in yoga, and what to do if you start to cry during a yoga class. I was teaching a brand new student just the other day, and she said she had such a negative experience with yoga, and I asked her to elaborate, and she said, well, the first time I tried to do yoga, I started crying. All this emotion came up. And it's like, right. So normal, right? But
yes.
People don't know that. So she just never came back and thought and that was just sort of the end of the story. So tell us, like, what should we do? Whether you're brand new or most of the listeners here, have a pretty significant practice when emotions start to bubble to the surface.
Absolutely. So first of all, let's just call yoga what it is. It's a little bit of a spiritual pressure cooker. And I don't mean that in the sense that it's there to break you down, right? But the idea behind yoga, the ancient practice of it, is to strip away all the distractions, all the other stuff, right? That's keeping you from what's really going on with you. And so what happens is we come to the mat and we're present. And for many people, that's the first time in the day or in the week or in the month or in the quarter, if they don't practice very frequently, that they're actually giving themselves permission to be present. So right there, that's an opportunity for us to kind of look in the mirror where we don't normally have an opportunity to do that. Now, if we have any kind of stuff going on at home or at work, or we're just having kind of a bad day, then creating a space where we're able to confront, okay, how am I feeling right now, is likely going to cause us to come face to face with these emotions that we are ignoring, right? Because we're allowing ourselves to be distracted. So the first thing I would say when someone feels an onset of emotion is to just take a deep breath. Remember, yoga is about managing your prana, and that's why pranayama, the art of yogic breathing, is so important. So when you feel that emotion coming on, first of all, breathe. Know that everything is temporary. So this emotional sort of wave, that's all it is. It's just a wave that's coming up and it's cresting, and then it will roll down. Now, the great thing is that if you're having an emotional release in yoga and you're a beginner, then that means that you're really ready for whatever the change is that you're going to sort of endeavor to undertake as you go on your personal growth journey. If you're someone who's been practicing yoga for a really, really long time and you've never had, what some people lovingly call this like emotional release during a yoga class, and you're kind of afraid of it, or it happens to you and it catches you off guard, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. Like you weren't good at yoga yesterday and now you're bad at yoga. It's simply that now you too are also ready for another phase of your yoga practice, because perhaps it has been just very physical, right? You've been focused on like, am I doing down dog right? Am I, is my leg aligned? Is my knee over my ankle? Is my knee, falling in? Is it falling out? And maybe you didn't have the space to kind of relax into the practice to be present. So the first step is to breathe. The second thing I would say is to remember that you're safe. No one is there to judge you. No one is there to be like, oh my God, look at Sally, she's crying. Oh no. Like, you're not the first person or the last person who's cried in a yoga class. Now, I will put an example of myself. 2 weeks ago, I went to a great workshop with a woman by the name of Sanaa Jaman. On Instagram, she goes by Lady Dork. If you're one of her 98,000 followers, then you know who I'm talking about. And it wasn't a super physical class, but it was a workshop where we really dove into being present. We thought about in child's pose what we were like as children, and I cried. Did I go into it expecting to cry? No, but I was giving myself permission to be present enough so that when I was in child's pose, which is a pose of surrendering, right? Your heart is to the earth, your head is down, your palms are either up or outstretched, but you're in a pose of surrender. And then you think about when you were vulnerable as a child, if you really give yourself permission to go there, and it had any type of childhood that was anything out of, anything other than Leave It to Beaver, you may cry. And I use myself as an example to just say that even when you've been practicing for a long time, and even when you're okay with having emotional release on the mat, you don't necessarily know when it's going to happen.
I love that you're sharing that. And, a lot of what you're saying reminds me, I had a Judith Hansen Lassiter on the show recently, and she's so amazing. And she said that, if you're getting agitated in some of these poses like child's pose, shavasana, some of the hip openers, I think tend to be a little more potentially emotionally triggering for people. She's saying it's just showing the agitation that was already there, right? So you can almost think of it like when you have these kind of emotional outbursts in yoga, it's good because that was an emotion that needed to be released and now is probably not going to be released in potentially like a fight with your spouse or yelling at your kid or something like that. Right. Do you agree?
Right. Or a destructive way, like getting super drunk or having, doing something that maybe isn't healthy.
Right. And I love how you're saying it's unexpected. I mean, even when you're very advanced in the practice, you're feeling great. You just don't know when there's that little something that someone says or a particular moment, even if you've done so much self-work, so much clearing, that these things still just keep bubbling up and bubbling up. It's just this never-ending healing process, I guess.
Exactly. And the reason why, and I don't want anyone listening to feel discouraged. And the reason why it's a never-ending process, because guess what, guys? We're constantly evolving. We're constantly changing. We're constantly growing. And as we grow, you have to think about it like another little notch on the tree that we're like, oh, I didn't know that notch was there. Okay, cool. I'm going to acknowledge that notch. Maybe it's not as pretty as I want it to be, but that's my notch. And okay, I got it. And I can now grow past that. The other thing is, instead of, I had a yoga teacher and he's not teaching anymore, but I loved going to his class because one, it was very physical. But I recall that especially during hip openers, and one of my teachers, Leanne Neal, she always says like the hip openers is like the emotional junk drawer. Like hips are like your emotional junk. So when you're in the class and you're standing in mountain and they're like, lift your right leg, keep lifting it. It's lifting you. And suddenly, I mean, and I'm saying this from my real experience, you feel like you want to throw yourself on the ground, throw your mat, start screaming and crying. And then you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. He just told me to lift my leg. Like, no one did anything to me. Like, I chose to come to this yoga class. Clearly, there's something else going on within me, right? So I want you guys, instead of thinking of it like, oh my God, this dreaded potential or release, think about it like gold. Think about like you're a gold miner, right? And the gold that you're mining for is your own like personal peace and your own personal like stability and balance. And when you go to yoga and you have these emotional things, it's like you took a little sieve and you put dirt in it and suddenly a nugget of gold is coming up. It's just that nugget of gold, the way it looks like in yoga, is sometimes crying in child's pose.
Right. Okay. So one of the things I was excited to have you on to talk about today is this idea of how to coach yourself through a mental obstacle during class. So when you talk about encountering a mental obstacle in yoga, is this exactly what you're talking about? Like when you're getting triggered, like by the teacher or by a pose, or like, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, there's, I think, three lenses on it, right? One is sort of just, am I going to commit to bringing yoga into my life? Because a lot of times we're kind of like putting a toe in, we have a great experience, and then we don't do it again for 3 months. And so I think sometimes the first obstacle is like being consistent. And that doesn't mean necessarily like going every day, but it could be like once a week going to a studio or even once a month, but having something consistent that isn't just like a Band-Aid. Yoga shouldn't be your Band-Aid. And if you use it as a Band-Aid, it's going to be very difficult for you to coach yourself through challenges that you occur when you show up because you're not doing it enough. So then the second lens is when you're in class and you start to want to do the headstand before you're ready, or do the forearm stand before you're ready, or look like Tom, who's over there doing Raja Kapotasana, King Pigeon, and putting his head on his big toe, and you're not there. That's an obstacle where I think people, it's like a quicksand, where people almost don't even realize it's an obstacle they're encountering. They think, oh, well, let me just look at Tom so I can like adjust to look more like him. But you're not in Tom's body. You're in your body, right? So the next obstacle is like, hey, how do I be in my body and be okay with what's happening in my body and not try to force the pose to look like Tom or Sarah or Awilda or Brett.
How can I be patient, right? And I feel like I'm like taking patience. Like, so first is consistency, then is patience.
Exactly. And then the third lens is this lens that we're talking about when the emotional stuff comes up. Because it can be triggered in so many different ways. You can be triggered by doing a particular emotion that kind of shakes loose some energy, right? You can be triggered by something the teacher says. Something the teacher says could just be like, whoa, why is she talking to me about like being open? Like, I don't want to hear that, and that could set you off right at the beginning of class before you even done a single pose. And you have to really for lack of a better, term, you have to get real with yourself and say, whoa, she's not coming at me. She didn't say, oh, Wilda, you need to be more open. No, she's addressing us all, So, okay, why is that making me so mad? What is the evidence I have, or who told me that I wasn't open, or what experience that I had where I was actually closed that I'm being triggered? So, and again, I would say, come back to the breath. Like, breathe. Remind yourself you are safe. And if you're going to practice yoga at a place where you don't feel safe, don't practice there. You need to be practicing yoga at a place where you feel safe. So you're safe. You come back to your breath. You remember like, hey, this is just a wave. This is just a wave coming over me. I can breathe through this. It's temporary. I'm going to be moving. I'm going to be directed into another pose. Imagine yourself like a ship, right? You're a ship out at sea and suddenly a squall is coming in and you're like, whoa. But you know what? That squall is going to move through and you're going to go back to smooth sailing.
Yeah, I love the analogy of the cresting wave. And I think I personally, and if this is helpful for people listening, I try to get really excited when a teacher says something that triggers me or asks me to do something that starts to trigger me, because that's like the little flashlight that's showing you I have work to do. This is where I need to do self-work. It's almost like shadow work. We have an episode on Savannah about that too, which I can link up in this episode, but it's like showing you where you haven't overcome some blocks yet. So I'd really encourage listeners, and Awilda, I'd love to get your take on this too. How do you tend to get triggered in class? Like, is it when the teacher is asking you to do a certain pose? Do you tend to react with like anger, impatience, wishing you were somewhere else? Or maybe you get really down on yourself instead of kind of getting angry at the teacher. That's a different common experience, right? Where it's like, I can't do this. I stink. And then like get really curious about that dialogue, right?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like, you know how there's like stages of denial? I think there's like stages of getting triggered in yoga. For me, initially, it was like angry, because also I had anger issues. You will find, I believe, and Brett, correct me if you feel like I'm talking way out of school here, but I feel like whatever you need to work on most is a thing that's going to pop up first, right? And for me, it was anxiety and temper. So the first things that would really stress me out would be like if I was being asked to do a pose and I was like getting anxious about, oh my God, can I keep holding it? Then I would get mad. Like, why the F am I being asked to raise my leg a 15th time? Like, am I in a flow class? Like, I would just start having this entire negative dialogue. And I had to, to keep it really real, it was simply like civility that kept me in check. It was simply the idea that I did not want to be that person that couldn't deal with their stuff enough to keep it together. I didn't want to be that person that was like storming out of the class. And like Brett said, for me, it was like, oh, okay, like this is a micro, event that really is a macro issue with you, Awilda. And so once I kind of faced that and worked on that, and I mean, still working on it, I've improved a lot, but still working on it. Then I got to a place in yoga where I was able to laugh when I got triggered. And for me, that is a very liberating thing. It's hard for me to maybe get as excited as Brett describes because sometimes for me there's a little anxiety or a little I want to do that already-ness. But I've been able to come to a place where I'm able to kind of like laugh at it and laugh at myself and have joy because I've reminded myself that the whole point of why I'm doing this, right, is to cultivate more joy and peace in my life. So if I'm presented with a teacher who's like, yeah, and now we're going to do headstand, right? Like I just was yesterday at a workshop where we were working on inversions. And I have in my own personal practice just got to a place where I feel very comfortable away from the wall doing Shirzasana headstand. But when I do it, I bring one leg up and then I bring the other leg up. So at this workshop yesterday, she was like, no one leg and then the other leg. Only both legs. And if you can't do both legs, that's fine. Just stay there and just squeeze the crap out of those thighs and build the strength. Now, Awilda a year ago would have been like, F this, I'm going to just do one leg and another leg. And and I would have been really angry and I would have had this really negative triggering experience. Whereas this time I was just like, oh my God, how is this even possible? And then laughed at myself and then just kept trying it,
I love the tip about bringing in humor. I think that's just, it's so essential because even for me in some really, difficult Kundalini practices or really, super challenging, like holding my arms above my head for 11 minutes while chanting something, like moments.
Oh my God, yes, I know all about that.
You can start to notice. Yes, you can start to notice. Like, I tend to always get angry. I tend to always feel this. And it just becomes funny. Like, when you have that consistency, which I think was one of the first things you talked about, you start to notice your habitual patterning. And you start to see, I always tend to get angry. Isn't this funny? I'm getting angry again, And it almost becomes a comedy with yourself. And that can really help shift. The other thing
is, like, when you get there, you're like, okay, well, maybe I need to be ahimsa, or maybe I need to be like self-care and put my arms down for 2 seconds and put my arms back up. And that's okay.
Right. And no judgment and stories about that. I love it. I want to thank you so much for sharing all of these tips with us. Super helpful. Before we let you go, and I know we're going to have you back on the show to talk about bringing yoga into our lives in the office. So those of you that work at a desk job or in corporate and are wondering, like, how can you bring all this amazing yogic knowledge into your relationships at work? Wilda's going to talk to us about that in the next episode. But before we let you go, just tell listeners a tiny bit more about yourself and how they can find and connect with you online.
Absolutely. You guys can always find me at awildarivera.com. I'm sure there'll be a link in the show notes, but it's AWILDARIVERA.com. On there, you'll find information about my international wellness retreats. I have an all-inclusive trip, yoga and excursions coming up to Colombia this October, the 6th to the 11th. I also have my own podcast called Win Life with Awilda Rivera that focuses on really bite-sized tips of inspiration around topics like adversity, perseverance. And I also feature people that are living in their passion and purpose in little 20-minute interviews. There's information about my success coaching. I have a free Facebook group called The Success Suite, Instagram at Miss Awilda Rivera, and I write for Savannah East, so you can find my writings on the website as well.
Yeah, and if you're not reading the Savannah East blog, it is really fantastic. So if you like this podcast, you want to be reading their blog. So I'll link all that up in the show notes. Awilda, thank you so much for being with us. Listeners, I'd love to hear from you. Let me know in the form of an iTunes review, in the private Facebook group, which is savannahspirit.com/group. That's what's going to redirect you. What you thought of today's episode. Are you a little bit more comfortable with the idea of being triggered in yoga and how you might handle it? Would love to hear from you. I'm wishing you a beautiful day full of yoga and meditation and joy. From my heart to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.